Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode 72. Here's Jen Swanson.
Hi, this is Jen Swanson, and you're listening to Communication Diva, the podcast about communication that hopefully will talk about communication skills, help you to think about them in a different way, to listen to interesting people, and to maybe be a little bit entertained. And so we're doing something a little bit different today. I am going to be bringing you an interview with a family member, and I have my husband, Scott Swanson, here. And the reason that we decided to do this interview is partly because I was around when he was on the phone the other day, and he was answering the question, what is a spiritual director? Because that's something that he happens to do. And his response was something like, well, do you have an hour? And so I thought, well, maybe other people would like to know what a spiritual director is. So if you've never heard this term before, hang on, and you're going to find out what it's about. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much.
So how did you actually answer that person? I don't remember your answer.
Yeah, I don't really remember either because the answer probably changes every time. But it's spiritual direction is a ancient tradition. It exists in pretty much every religious background. It exists within Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism. And it recognizes that when people are on a spiritual journey, it's a very difficult thing to do alone. And that there are times when it is helpful to have someone who you can go to either to help you reflect, to ask you particular questions, to listen carefully for some of the issues that might be coming up in terms of your own spiritual journey. And so those are the kinds of things that a spiritual director does.
Right. And you are an ordained minister in the United Church of Canada, and so are already sort of in this line of work. But can you tell the listener how you got into the spiritual direction aspect of it?
Well, I started as I suspect all spiritual directors do, which was as a directee myself. I began seeking out formal spiritual direction when I was ordained, which is about 15 years ago. And so I have been working with, I've had two spiritual directors during that time and working with them roughly once a month. And so after a number of years of doing that, just to kind of in the ways that people do discern new directions in their life, new paths that they want to explore. I think it came over a period of time with being on retreat and just being open to different things. It started to kind of dawn on me or come to me that this was a path that I was being invited to explore. And so I've been doing that, and yeah, it's been good. It's corroborated by the fact that I have gifts for it, and which is a good way to kind of test whether you're actually called to do something or not, if you're capable of doing it.
Yeah, if you're good at it or not.
Yeah.
So how can you differentiate it from counseling or therapy or coaching even?
Yeah, counseling, coaching, therapy. Yeah. So spiritual direction, it takes on different forms depending on, depending on the people involved. So different directees or different directors, I should say, will approach it differently with kind of a different model. Different directees will come with different needs or hopes, expectations. And the context of what's going on in a directee and a director's life will affect that as well. So it's not therapy. There are times when spiritual direction can be therapeutic. So that as a person is working on listening to what spirit is doing in their life, they can find that God is, or whatever you call that. I call it God, but different people have different names for it. Doesn't really matter to me what you call it, but whatever that is, that big ultimate thing out there is, um, that it's working in ways in our life. And so, and it may be around issues that we hurts and um, pains that we bring with us from our past, which is my understanding of usually what therapy is doing, is helping people to kind of deal with whatever's gone on in the past. And so, so spiritual direction can be therapeutic in the sense that it can facilitate the healing process, but it's not therapy per se. Um, as far as coaching goes, coaching is, I think of coaching, I have some coaching training as well, and I think of coaching more as an approach to a conversation rather than a particular rubric or set of piece of content. So one can use, so coaches will often talk about the coach approach, and you can use a coach approach to spiritual direction in the same way that you can use a coach approach to therapy or to counseling or teaching or whatever it may be. I do tend frequently to use a coach approach because I have a background as an educational supervisor and pastoral counseling and various other experiences that I had previous to this. And so, yeah, so I do often use coaching style techniques in my work, but there are times when that's not appropriate. There are times when a better approach is one more of companion, or there might be a time when the approach, a better approach, might be one of I don't know. I'm just trying to think of think of a good word for it. Yeah, I'm blanking right now.
That's all right. That happens. Is it denominational?
Not necessarily so. I think that there will be some people who will prefer to stay within their own religious tradition. As I said at the beginning, each sort of the great spiritual traditions has this somewhere within it in some form, at least as far as I'm aware, they all do. So I tend to deal with people in the Christian tradition because that is the area that I am most familiar with, and that's where my experience and kind of my understanding comes from. If somebody who is Jewish or Muslim or a Buddhist came to me seeking spiritual direction, I'm not sure if I would be able to do that or not. It would really depend. I think I would still be able to ask questions, but my concern would be that I guess my concern would be that I don't have enough familiarity with those traditions from the inside to really be able to intuit what's going on for people and what the way forward might be. It's a spiritual direction is a bit of a misnomer in the sense that it's not necessarily directive. The job of a spiritual director is not to tell the directee what to do in their relationship with the holy or with God. So one can, I think, ask open questions, listen carefully, and you can do that with a person from any spiritual tradition. But I suspect probably if somebody from a Jewish background came to me looking for spiritual direction, I would want to find a Jewish spiritual director for them. Mm-hmm. But within Christianity, so the tradition where this is kind of carried down through the centuries has been in the Roman Catholic tradition, probably in the Eastern Church, the Eastern rites as well, the Orthodox churches. But within, so there's many Protestants, Presbyterians or Lutherans or United or whoever, Baptists who, if they're interested in this, will end up going to someone from a Roman Catholic tradition, a Benedictine or a Jesuit or whomever, just because that's where a lot of the work has been done and that's where the tradition has been held. the people I work with are all, I guess we'd say Protestant, kind of in the broadest sense, and one person who's kind of pretty syncretistic. She's kind of Protestant, but she kind of takes it all in together, and so that's, it all works. I think anybody from a Christian background, however you'd understand that, or kind of a Western, but the popular phrase these days is spiritual but not religious. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you that question.
Yeah. So, probably anybody who would put themselves in the spiritual but not religious camp, I think most spiritual directors could deal with that. But it would depend on the director. Some people would specifically want to work with, for example, there's some Jesuits who are really familiar with Ignatian practices. That's the most of my formation has been in Ignatian spirituality.
Do you want to explain that just a little bit?
Sure. Well, so within the Roman Catholic Church, there are a number of different schools, different spiritual leaders who created their own followers, and so they're called orders. So you have the Franciscans, who that was developed by Saint Francis of Assisi, the guy with the bird sitting on his arm and talking to the flowers. So Francis of Assisi was the founder of the Franciscan order. Ignatius of Loyola was the founder of the Jesuit order. Benedict is the founder of the Benedictine order. And they all have slightly different, what they call rules or ways of living, and different insights or approaches to the Christian tradition based on their own personal experiences and ways of being. So there will be some directors who will prefer to stick to a particular form, and then there'll be other directors who will be more comfortable ranging across a variety of topics.
Mm-hmm. What kind of training do you need to have to be a spiritual director?
Well, up until now, spiritual direction is not a regulated field. It's not. There's no accrediting body. There's no set of minimum standards of practice that a person has to have or follow. There are, having said that, there's a number of different formational programs that are out there that one can take to become a spiritual director. I think spiritual direction is something that a lot of us do. So another term for it is soul friending, or being having a spiritual companion. And you don't need a diploma or a degree to do that, mm-hmm. right? And we all do that for each other all the time. People who have the label spiritual director, or who claim that label for themselves, they will have different kinds of formation, and certainly if there's a particular area that a person would want to know about, it would be fair, just in the same way that you would interview a counselor who you were going to interview a spiritual director to say, what's your background, what's your approach, what's your training, what have you done any programs? Mm-hmm. So some have, some haven't, and I guess my feeling is that I've worked with a few therapists personally over the course of my life, and I found that some of them, notwithstanding the fact that they had doctorate degrees in counseling psychology and all sorts of pieces of paper on the wall, really weren't very good at their job.
Right.
And then there's other people who just have a natural gift for it, which is not to say that training isn't helpful and formation isn't helpful, but I don't put all my stock in mm-hmm. what certifications or pieces of paper a person has. But, everybody will make their own decision.
You have to click. It's a relationship, so you have to click with the person, right?
It is a relationship, and there is that kind of that je ne sais quoi of, is this a person who I am comfortable with? Is this a person who I can speak to, who I trust, who I sense has a deep spiritual life and a connection that is going to that this person is on a journey and is going to be able to, when I'm in the glue, kind of give me some ideas about what are the next steps? Where do you go from here? How do you get out of this? Yeah, so it really is about, I think, about connecting with an individual.
How do people know that they need spiritual direction?
Uh, well, need spiritual direction. I suppose. I suppose in a way, needing spiritual direction is kind of like needing therapy. I mean, everybody could benefit. Some people could probably benefit a lot more than others. Some people could get along fine without it. I would say for anybody who has a sense that they're on a spiritual journey, however they understand um, that they are um, wanting to be in a closer relationship with God, with the Holy, um, deepening that, deepening the spiritual journey, perhaps taking on some new practices, some new meditation or prayer techniques that they want to expand and deepen their own journey. I think anybody who wants to do that work will benefit from a spiritual director when they find the right person to work with.
Mm. It's not outside of church circles, is it a widely known thing? Because I know that I've mentioned the term a few times in different places, having a spiritual director myself, and people sort of look a bit quizzical and have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's not even widely known within faith circles, really. It would be more commonly known, as I mentioned earlier, within the Roman Catholic tradition, probably within some of the Eastern rites, the Eastern Orthodox traditions. I'm guessing, actually, I don't know that for sure. It's a little more common amongst, say, for example, Anglican, Episcopal, Lutheran, those kinds of groups. Amongst other Protestant churches, it's been out of, it was part of the baby that got thrown out with the bathwater during the Protestant Reformation. And so, no, you're right. Most people don't know about it. And that's just the few people who are involved in the church in North America, right? And we live in this increasingly secular society where the vast majority of people don't know anything about church, never mind. So if you've got something that not many people in the church know about it, you can probably imagine how few people outside the church know about
it. And yet there seems to be this hunger for the spirit.
There is, well, spiritual but not religious. Like in Canada now, it's the fastest growing demographic according to Census Canada. And so there are people who, we live in this time where there's a lot of dis-ease or distrust of any institution, government, churches, you name it. And yet people, and, like the churches have, wear a lot of that, right? Like we have done, our history over the last couple thousand years in the West is not all that great in some ways. And so, anybody who's looking for fodder for some reason to say, no, that's not for me, it's not hard to find. You don't have to look very far. And yet, yeah, you're right. People do have this yearning. They have this longing. They have this desire. And so very often that gets named as spiritual but not religious because they don't want to be associated with a particular dogma or what have you, but they know that they have within themselves this yearning. And to me, that's the little piece of God that God puts in all of us, which longs for a greater union, for greater communion with that. And so people go looking for that. I think that's partly why Buddhism is so fashionable right now, is because it doesn't have the baggage in North America that Christianity does. And so people can kind of make it what they want it to be, which is harder to do with Christianity because for a lot of people it comes with a lot of baggage. But at the same time, there's a lot of incredibly rich tradition, some beautiful stuff there. And so, for those of us who do still find, in spite of the history and some of the contemporary presentations or yeah, the ways that it shows up in our culture. There's some of us, in spite of that, who still find it rich and meaningful and a helpful way to engage with the universe.
Can you take the listener through a little bit of what a session would look like? How, are you face to face? How is it structured? How long is it?
Well, increasingly, spiritual direction is not done face to face. Although I think it really depends. Like if you go on retreat, and if it's a directed retreat where there's a spiritual director at the retreat center where you're at, then you'll meet with that person face to face for, once a day or as often as you do that. But for regular ongoing relationships, I meet with my spiritual director. Well, up until last year, I always met with her face to face. She's about a 45-minute drive from me. This year, I have started to go more to telephone sessions with her and the occasional face-to-face session, but it's just a little easier on the planet and on my time with all that driving. The people who I direct, there's one fellow who comes to my office who I meet with face-to-face. I have one person who lives quite a few hours north of here by car, up in northern BC, and we meet by Skype, which has worked pretty well for us. I have another person who's local, but a little farther away. We meet by telephone. Another person in Alberta that we're just getting started, and we haven't quite figured out how we're going to be doing that yet. So it's in terms of how one does it, it's really a matter of preference and what's going to work for the two of you. And frequency, usually about once a month. Kind of regular spiritual direction is kind of every 4 weeks or so. And yeah, there's breaks in the summer when life gets busy, and sometimes that gets spread out. But I think it's best done monthly. The content can really vary. If a director is giving a directee new spiritual practices, like a new prayer forms of prayer, meetings might be much more frequent to begin with. Like I know one approach, a director I know who his formation has also been in the Jesuit Ignatian background, and so he teaches Ignatian prayer. And when he takes on a new directee, they meet every week.
Wow.
For the first 4 or 5 weeks at least. And they do that. He does that in order to make sure that this person understands the prayer form. If there's any questions or problems or glitches that are coming up, that they have a chance to ask those questions and get them answered. And then once he's satisfied that this person understands the prayer form and is comfortable using it daily, then they back off to once a month. So in terms of the content of a session, if it is around teaching a new form, then that'll be a piece of it. Very often sessions are based on, I think ideally sessions, if you're not teaching a directee something, then really it's not so much about the relationship between the director and the directee. It's really about the relationship between the directee and God. And the director's job is not to get in the way of that. The director's job is to kind of stand. I guess the visual picture I would offer would be of the director and the directee standing beside each other, shoulder to shoulder, facing God. Mm-hmm. And so the director's job is to listen, to maybe ask some questions, to maybe offer some insights or thoughts about what they hear. But the content is really about the directee's relationship with God. So very often an opening question will be something like, so what's gone on this month? And the way this stuff, like it's not all sort of egghead theoretical stuff. It's, how's work? How are the kids? How's your marriage? Because these are the places where we really live. And these are the places, therefore, where God shows up in one way or the other. So, very often a part of a session will be sort of cycling through the child who's having the problem, or the job that is unsatisfying for now 3 years in a row, or whatever it might be. It's whatever the directee brings. If a directee is working with a particular prayer form that involves journaling, there may be something that comes out of a journal entry that they want to bring up. So it should be more led by the directee than the director in terms of the content, I think.
There's an aspect of accountability, though, as well.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's accountability for the director. Well, it's another difference between coaching and spiritual direction is that coaching is very often for a short term um, kind of a relationship. So you may have a contract that's 3 months or 6 months or something like that. Spiritual direction tends to be indefinite. And so, the spiritual directee always reserves the right to look for a spiritual director who's a better fit. That's one of the ways that there's accountability. One of the ways for me, and truthfully, one of the reasons that I sought out a spiritual director in the first place was I didn't trust myself to be praying regularly. And I thought, if I have somebody who I'm going to go to every month, every 4 weeks, who's going to say, so how's your prayer life? Then at least the week before I go and see that person, I'm going to have something to talk about. Right. So yeah, some people will use it as a form of accountability for themselves in terms of their spiritual life.
Kind of like flossing the week before you go to the dentist.
Exactly like flossing the week before you go to the dentist.
Right. All right. Anything else you wanted to say about spiritual direction or what it is?
No, I think not really, except to say that if this is something that is of interest to people, there are resources out there. One of the best ones, I think, is an organization called Spiritual Directors International. And they have a website, which is, I think, www.sdi.org. You can find information there on spiritual direction. But the other thing you can find there, if you're interested in following up and you don't happen to have a Benedictine retreat center down the street from where you live or something like that, is they have a finder on there. And anybody who is a member of SDI can list on there as a spiritual director. And you can look them up by region. So you can find who, if there's anybody in your area who's doing this work, if face-to-face is important for you.
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it can be anybody globally, probably.
Yeah, well, in that sense, it is very similar to coaching. Like I said, I work with a person in northern BC, starting with a person in Alberta, and with technology the way it is now, with low long distance telephone rates and all the various online platforms from FaceTime to Skype to you name it. There's all sorts of technology available now that really removes the need for geographic proximity, unless you really like that face-to-face touch, in which case it still matters.
Mm-hmm. So how can people find you if they're interested?
There is a website they can go to. It is www.uzima Services. It's spelled Uzima. And it's actually a Swahili word that has a very similar meaning to the Jewish word shalom. It has to do with well-being, wholeness, health, fullness of life. It's kind of a word that encapsulates all of that. So the website is www.uzimaservices.com. Or they can just email me. And my email address is scott@uzimaservices.com.
Great. So I will put a link to the SDI website on the show notes, and the link to Uzima Services, and your email as well. And great. Any last words to the listener?
It's if for anybody who is really interested in either has an active spiritual life that they'd like to deepen, or if they're kind of feeling like this is a part of their life that they've been ignoring for a while and they would like to take it more seriously, this is certainly a great avenue to to use to explore that. It's not certainly by no means the only one, but it's for me one of the essential elements of the spiritual journey is the communal aspect of it. Doesn't mean you absolutely have to be in church every week or that there needs to be a whole bunch of people, but I think certainly within the Christian tradition there's this essential piece which has to do with discovering God, discovering the holy, deepening our understanding and our sense of that happening in community. So whether you have a spiritual friendship with somebody who you get together with for coffee every once in a while and just talk about what's going on in your life, whether you have a relationship with a pastor or a priest or a minister in a church that you're involved with, or whatever, or a small group of people you meet with. There's all kinds of ways you can do it, but really being in connection is important. And I suspect that's true for a lot of the other traditions, the other great religious traditions on the planet as well.
Okay. Thanks very much for being my guest here on Communication Diva.
Thanks for your time.
So we'll put all of that on the show notes at www.communicationdiva.com. And I hope that if you have any feedback for us, you will leave us a note. You can leave us a voicemail on the SpeakPipe button that's on the right-hand side of the screen. There's a comment section at the bottom of the show notes there. You can email me at jenn@communicationdiva.com. And all feedback is definitely welcome. So until next time, this is Jen Swanson and Scott Swanson. Thanks for listening.